And now, through the miracle of modern electronic science, we take you back to 1623 for an interview with Richard Walden, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to do something unprecedented today. I'm actually using an attachment designed by some egghead in Seattle that allows me to literally do an intercentury interview with my 7th great-grandfather, Richard Walden, who arrived in Plymouth, Massachusetts colony in 1623. Do we have a connection?
Aye, I can hear ye, but I can barely see ye. Me brother Ralph be holding some sort of iPhone? Be this some sort of magic?
No, sir, this is one of your descendants from the year 2023. Can you hear me okay?
Aye, boy. Be ye daft? I just told ye aye.
Ah, yes, so you are my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa. So in interest of saving time, may I call you Richard, or Rick, or Ricky?
Speak thou not unto me with such disrespect, by ye be me flesh and blood, I'll still turn ye over me knee.
Whoa, wow, sorry about that. Didn't mean to touch a nerve. Can I call you Grandpa?
Aye, that'd be fine, methinks. But who are ye? I can see thou hast upside-down Walden ears and a peaked Walden eyebrow. I can see thou art indeed a Walden.
Grandpa, you sort of sound like a pirate.
I be no pirate. I be faithful subject of King James. I even have one of his Bibles. First edition, mind you.
This really is a first, Grandpa. You know, you're the first one of all of my Walden ancestors past my father that I've ever even gotten to meet.
Why thou speakest as a fool? Speak thou plainly.
Well, this is new technology that allows us to span time to talk to ancestors. I'm curious, you and your brothers came over on the British ship Anne, is that not right?
Aye, that we did. We missed the speed well in the Mayflower. That'd be fine, as they were leaky old little tubs anyway.
But they did make it, or at least the Mayflower did. Tell me, when you arrived, how were you treated by the Pilgrims?
Aye, I think they were not so happy to see us.
Well, why is that, Grandpa?
I heard one of them utter the words, "Yon goeth ye neighborhood."
Well, at least you missed the first starving winter, so I have a question.
Aye.
Did you indeed land on Plymouth Rock?
Well, we landed at Plymouth and there be rocks here.
How much of it shows out above the water, that particular rock?
Well, at high tide it shows the dividing of a foot above water level. Here be, said Stone.
So it is exactly in the same place today as it was in 1623. Well, Grandpa, so-called scientists nowadays tell us that man is changing the weather, and if they were right, I should think Plymouth Rock would be underwater.
These words be blasphemy! Only the Almighty can change the weather.
Well, I have to agree with you. In 1880, they carved the date 1620 in that rock. That is 257 years in the future for you, but 143 years ago for me. We already knew that the water had gotten no deeper since 1880.
Let me your pint, by.
Well, Grandpa, the point is, in your day, people seem to have far, far more common sense.
Aye, you be distressing me.
I'm sorry, Grandpa. Hey, by the way, England has a new king. His name is Charles.
The king be his majesty, King James, that gave us the Bible in plain English.
No, I mean in 2023, just as of this weekend.
His majesty's son, Prince Charles, surviveth in 2023?
Nay, I mean no. This is Charles III.
Forsooth.
It seems that we're losing our link, so I'll bid you farewell. And it's been wonderful talking to you, sir.
Ah, you're a sorry-looking lad, but thou art me flesh and blood. Fare thee well, Bruce.
Welcome back to the Bruce Walden blog, the Bruce Walden Show, the show that dares to ask the question, can we just be honest? I know some of you watch this blog and you hear the honesty and you just can't handle the honesty and you have to run away. That's fine. There are others that will replace you. But I'm not going to lie to you. As the man said, I'm not saying anything that I say because I hate you. I'm telling you the truth. I love you enough to tell you the truth. If you can't handle the truth, that's on you, not me. In case you hadn't figured it out, this show is about climate change. You know, the lies that you've been fed over these last, at least the 70s in my lifetime, I remember. But climate change. Let me make something very, very clear. I am a conservationist. I've always been a conservationist. But I am not an environmentalist, Posey sniffing, tree hugging, bunny kissing, meathead. All right? I use a little bit of common sense, or I try to. And when people are telling you things that sound a little bit too ridiculous to be true, chances are pretty good that they aren't true. Teddy Roosevelt was the first true conservationist, I think, at least one with any power. And people think, well, he invented the National Park Service and things like that. We remember that. But they don't read the whole story. He's a hero of mine as a soldier and as a president and a thinker. I'm going to read something that he said once. Something that he wrote, and I think he gave it in a speech. This is from August 31st, 1910. He said, "Conservation means development as much as it does protection. I recognize the right and duty of this generation to develop and use the natural resources of our land, but I do not recognize the right to waste them or to rob by wasteful means the generations that come after us." Now, in a little bit, I'm going to talk about how that in our love of the environment, we are destroying the environment, at least here in the Alaska, the part of Alaska where I live. We'll talk about that as we roll along. Hope you'll remember this spot. We're only about a minute into this thing, so if you have to, go back and refer to the Teddy Roosevelt thing. When I was a young National Guardsman, I worked for the Forestry Department in Missouri. Up this tower right here. That's me here late last year with my sister Francine, who also worked that tower, as did her husband, and I think her oldest son works there occasionally now. But I worked there one summer. Not long, not exactly a lifetime, but enough to give me an appreciation for what those hard-working men and women do up those fire towers back when they still used them and so forth. I've studied the issue to some degree, and we here at the Bruce Walden Show, all of us, have researched global warming. We have to come to realize why the Ice Age ended. This is what cave women looked like so many years ago, and with perfect hairdos like that, there could be little doubt that they were probably using Aquanet to keep their perfect coif in place. Mom, God rest your soul, I know you used Aquanet too, but these ladies were using it a million years ago, according to the movie. Those aerosol cans spraying tons of poison into the atmosphere, cause you getting the idea? Okay, it's truth time. The world was going through warming and cooling phases for thousands of years before the invention of any stuff that they're blaming for global warming or global cooling or any of that mess. Have you ever heard the name Dixie Lee Ray? Or do you remember the name Dixie Lee Ray? She was once the governor of Washington, and she was on the Rush Limbaugh program a few times. She was on there. She was a pretty frequent guest. She happened to be a Democrat, but she's also a very wise woman who, let's put it like this. She was born in 1914, and she died in 1994. So she had 80 years in there where she's seen what was going on. But she had been the governor of Washington for a while, and she was an environmental scientist, I believe. When she was born in Tacoma in 1914, it was a burgeoning town. It had been there for a while. Go look it up. I looked it up because I was watching an episode of Here Come the Brides. How many of you my age and older remember that show, which takes place in Seattle, and they were visiting Tacoma, so I wanted to see which one came first. But she was the governor of Washington there, and she said, you know what, you talk to these people that talk about the good old days. And she said, I was in those good old days, and they really weren't all that good. And she started talking about the things that were happening back in those good old days. For instance, waste, sewage, human waste, animal waste floating right down the middle of the street, all times of the year. Disease coming and going with mosquitoes and rats. And if you had a house that was electrified, or you had a house with electricity, or an apartment or whatever, it meant that you had in one of your rooms, you had a single light bulb hanging down. If you had any electronic device, you had to unscrew the light bulb, screw that device in there, and use it. Now, for that time, that was probably pretty high speed. Nowadays, we would think that laughable. Now, I have lived off the grid, and we would have probably been happy to have that one plug in at that time. But back in those days, it was kind of a new thing, and people are kind of really just starting to catch on to electric wiring. But Dixie Lee Ray lived for 80 years, and one might consider her an expert observer of those years, from 1914 to 1984. We'll get back to her a bit later, but laying a bit of groundwork here. Who knows who Deb Haaland, Haaland, Secretary of the Interior? Have you heard her? Have you seen her talking? She refused to answer a single question in the Republican Senate. When the Republican Senate was talking to her, she wouldn't answer any questions. She'd start off with well, Senator, I thank you so much for that question. Thank you so much, Senator, for that question. Thank you, Senator, for that question. And one of them finally got so frustrated, he said, stop thanking us for the questions. Just answer the questions, which she refused to do. Now, she's of the Pueblo Nation in Arizona. And those on the left seem to believe that this thing alone qualifies her to be the Secretary of the Interior. Because, of course, the Indians were great guardians of the environment, weren't they? Okay, let's talk about that for a second. I didn't mean to go into this, but I will. And this involves part of my family, too, because I'm part Native, too. But when you had the Native folk in the prairie areas of the country, before it was a country, or it was that country, whatever they called it in those days, they realized that anytime there was a wildfire, the grass came back greener, the buffalo herd increased. So they burned off the grass, like a good conservationist would do. No one would come back stronger. And the buffalo herd came back stronger. So the people had more meat. They came back stronger, and they fought less because there was more food to go around. And if you think about it, back in those days, it wasn't so much over territory, although that did happen. It was over the food that you could grow in that territory. If you had plenty of food, you didn't have nothing to fight about. I know my grammar isn't perfect. I'm not writing a book here. I'm just talking to you as I would talk to a friend. You know, I love it when I talk to our Native folk here in Alaska, and they understand how things lie in 2023. Not 1623, but right now, where reality is. Honestly, if I could have my way, I'd go 150 years in the past and just stay there. I think I'd be more comfortable then. But then, again, maybe not. I like being able to flip on my studio lights and talk to you. But as I always say, it is what it is. It's not how I wish it was. And we just have to deal with that. So, but Ms. Holland shows up and is asked about the Lava Ridge Windmill Project in Idaho. Have you heard about it? I didn't get to see the picture. I looked for it, and you can't find it anywhere. If you do, please let me know. But it's 144,000 acres. And they want to put windmills on it. And I don't mean little bitty windmills. Great big old windmills. But she was shown a picture of it, an artist concept of what it would look like. 144,000 acres covered with windmills. Some as high as, the lowest one I think was as tall as the Empire State Building, and the highest one being 100 feet taller than the Space Needle. And they then showed that on 36 acres, with I think it was a hydroelectric plant, they could make the same amount of electricity on 36 acres. She was shown an artist conception and asked if she thought her folks would be okay with it. It was later explained to her, apparently because she had not considered that the smaller windmills would be as high as the Empire State Building, the tallest, 100 feet taller than the Space Needle, which neither she nor the senator asking the question had ever seen. I have. I used to live down there, a station at Fort Lewis. If you ever read my book, The Governor's Initiative, you'd understand what I'm talking about. And if that doesn't work for you, then see the Elvis Presley movie, It Happened at the World's Fair. It shows it in there too. But these people apparently had never seen either. She was asked why 88% of the nation's known cobalt reserves, an important component for rechargeable batteries, by the way, has been blocked from development by this administration within our country. And we heard again. Time after time, she was asked questions, and she always led her answer with, "Senator, thank you for your question." Now moving back to Dixie Lee Ray. And remember, this is someone who knew what she was talking about. She said that to power the city of New York with solar cells, one would need a solar array the size of New York City. So here you have a city, and here you have the solar array to power that city. Where are you going to put them? I wonder where those might come from. Could it be, where would those solar cells come from? Maybe China? Well, we sure can't make them. Okay, if you feel as I do about human trafficking and modern slavery, let us just talk for a moment about the cobalt, about mining thereof. And I don't know, Congo, for instance. Little precious children, precious little children, children I would love to adopt, working the livelong day, digging that their precious little fingers to the bone to get that stuff out for their master. And I said master. This time the masters live in Beijing. Don't fool yourself. China owns them, lock, stock, and barrel. Here, miners would be paid a fair wage, and we have plenty of cobalt and other stuff. But let us not even go that far. Here's a surprise for some of you, especially you who never took simple power mechanics in high school. Just making a rechargeable battery doesn't make electricity. That electricity comes from somewhere. I know in your fantasy world it comes right out of the wall, because that wall's just crammed full of electricity, right? It's just smushed in. When they build the house, they cram the walls full of electricity. And doggone it, when you plug in your electric appliance, it just comes leaking right out into your appliance, right? Okay, now let me explain how it works here in the real world where adults live. Either it has to be, that electricity has to either be made by hydro or coal. Alaska has some of the cleanest burning coal on earth, but we can't move it. Indonesia had clean coal, has. Utah had clean coal. Amazingly, about the time that Bill Clinton was getting these big donations from this family in Indonesia, he declared that part of Utah, where all the clean burning coal was, a national monument, so he could only get coal from over there. Strange about that, isn't it? Another source is nuclear. How's that going? How about natural gas? You remember when we tried to start what is now the Eklutna plant up here? I was on the planning commission when we were going through that. And actually I got there, I think, just after they finally settled on the site for it, but we had to settle where the wires were going to go. That's another story I'll tell you about another crooked politician one day soon. Yeah, Jim, I'm talking about you, bub. So the electric company, MEA, they went to the assembly and asked them, can we build a coal power generator or a power plant this size? No. Okay, well, what if it's this size? They kept downsizing. No. Okay, what if it burns natural gas? No. Municipality of Anchorage said, no problem, come on in here. And so they built the Eklutna plant that should have been here in the valley, and it should have been probably bigger because we're growing by leaps and bounds. That's not going to stop anytime soon. So then they had to run the power lines, and then they whined and cried about where the power lines were going to go. Folks, here's an old saying. If you're going to make an omelet, doggone it, sometimes you got to break a couple of eggs. Fact, you need 4 times as much juice to charge your car as you need to run your air conditioner. And that's here in Alaska just as well as anywhere else. If the entire nation ran on electric cars, the first night of plugging it in would, if everybody plugged in at the same time, would shut down the grid coast to coast. Go look it up. Having wind or sun to recharge them would require a raise of those plants that would probably be as big as Alaska itself, maybe much bigger. And that's just land covered with solar cells, which only work during the day, or windmills that only work during wind. Are you catching on? A lot of you never will. I don't care if you hate me for that. In knowing all this, even Elon Musk is lifting and shifting and making the switch from to hydrogen fuel cell cars. Stand by to stand by. That's a wise man. And those of you morons out there that call him stupid because you don't like him, I wish I was that stupid. Could somebody come over and hit me over the head with a ball bat and knock a few brain cells loose so I could be stupid enough to make billions like that? As for Bruce, if God is willing, and to quote Dad again, when my rich uncle gets out of the poorhouse, I want to have my own wind generator, solar array, hydro, all that groovy stuff. Because if you have lots of land, you can do that on a small scale. Why do I want to do that? Because I don't like being beholden to anyone for anything if I can avoid it. I don't want to have wires coming on and off my property. I don't want to have pipes coming on and off my property. And by the way, if I ever get to that place, if the police come around and say, hey, we want to search your land, we think you got something going on, I'll say, okay, under one condition. You got to tell all your friends to come out here and check it out too, because I want everybody to do what I'm doing. Oh, and by the way, we'll have dinner on the table, and everything you eat will be grown right on this property. And I won't charge you a dime. Might even have some coffee in there. Thinking about that. Now, they did a study in Greenland here, a few years ago, and they drilled a core down through the ice. And it's probably 6 or 8 inches in diameter, something like that. And these scientists, they know how to do this. I don't. But they were able to determine the average temperature at these different levels of ice when it was frozen over the thousands of years. And these are their figures, not mine. I'm not making this up. I'm telling you what they said. But they drilled down to at least what they assumed is 8,000 years ago. They found that from 6,000 BC, note, I didn't say BCE, it's before Christ, not before the common era. It's before Christ. When Jesus was born, he split time in two. Deal with it. They found that from 6,000 BC to about 2,000 BC, the temperatures were about 2.5 degrees warmer on the average than now. Now, whether that's Fahrenheit or Celsius, I don't know, and it doesn't matter, because what I'm about to say, it still ring true. At the time when Christ Jesus walked this earth, it dropped to about where it is now. 1,000 years later, in medieval times, it was up slightly. By the time my great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa got here in the Americas, it was down a bit on the average. I think this is what they called the Little Ice Age. I'm not sure. But anyway, I think it was in the 1600s. Anyway, it got kind of chilly there for a while. And the polar ice cap had advanced somewhat. And before that, we know that to be true to some degree. We know to some degree that that's probably true. In the, I think, 5th century, might have been the 6th century, it's reputed, and there is a journal that kind of documents this. So I, as a man with a lot of Irish blood, and proud thereof, I like to think this is true. But it said that there was a group of monks from Ireland who set out in a ox skin, I don't know if you call it a canoe, is a big boat. And they rowed until they eventually found what we now know to be Newfoundland. Whether they did or not, the evidence looks kind of clear to me. But the bottom line is, what is figured is that there was an ice shelf, and they just kind of stayed along that with that on their starboard side, and next thing you know, they were hitting what we now know as Newfoundland. Whether it happened or not, I don't know, but I can see why it would. And that's why I say that when, okay, well, the whoever came here first came here first. And that's another story for another day. But when the Irish showed up in the Americas and they saw the Indians, or, well, the native folk, they weren't Indians. The Indians were in India. But they saw these native folk and they're like, well, these guys are doing pretty much the same thing that the cats are doing back at the crib, back in Ireland. So they turned around, went home, didn't talk about it too much because there's nothing to report. That's like going next door to the next town. The Vikings came over 500 years later and they said, yeah, these guys are, doing about the same stuff as our folks are doing back home. Nothing to report here. We'll hang around a while. Some of them stayed, but some went home. In 1492, when Columbus sailed the ocean blue and he got to the Americas, Europe had advanced quite a bit. So when they came to what they considered more primitive places, then they had something to talk about when they got home. Just an aside, but I think it's interesting. In 1875, when they first began literally measuring and cataloging such things as the temperature readings, it was the lowest temperature than it's been probably since that time 8,000 years ago on the average. However, it must have been warmer 60 years or so before that. Samuel Clemens, you'll know him by the name Mark Twain. He talked about picking oranges, and I believe he said in the Boot Hill area of Missouri. That picture I showed of me under that tower a while ago, that's close to the Boot Hill. And I'm here to tell you, they don't have oranges down there anymore. But in Mark Twain's time, Samuel Clemens, same guy, they had them then. In the last 100 years, the average has increased by 1 degree, and not at all since about 1978. You still believing in your global warming? Here's the trick. This is how they scare people who believe their lies. They have computer-generated models. They have computer-generated models that show temperatures running right off the scale. Obama visited the exit glacier down here by Seward. Had no idea what he's looking at, and he sends her, this is proof positive that global warming is taking place. You mean because there's an iceberg there, bonehead? What a clod. You people that say, oh, he was very intelligent. Are you saying what I think you're saying? Because you sound like a racist to me. I've got a lot of black folks in my family. They don't need your exception. They're intelligent all on their own. They don't need you to make an exception for them. And I don't appreciate it when you do. They're good folks. They're smart folks. They don't need you to feel sorry for them. I saw a picture of a polar bear on an ice floe. And people, oh, we have to do something to save Nanook's environment. Hey, stupid, let me explain how polar bears operate. That's where they hunt. That's where their food is. You think they sit around up here on the north slope, wallowing around? If they're on the slope, they're hunting down caribou. If they're on the ice, they're hunting seal. Here's how they do it. They find a blowhole. This is how the Eskimo learn how to hunt seal. A polar bear will find a blowhole, and they'll claw at the edge because it blows up like this. A seal, because it takes a breath, he blows up the water, and it comes into a cone. A grizzly or a polar bear will scratch that until it's nice and thin, and he'll sit right there, sometimes for days, waiting for that seal to come up and get a breath. And when he sees the breath come out, he smacks him and yanks him out by the head. The Eskimos got a cool way that they used to do that. I know people, oh, you're supposed to call them Inuit. I got a lot of Eskimo friends. They don't mind being called Eskimo. And if you do, tell me and I'll change what I call you. But I've never had one tell me, I'm called an Inuit. Whatever. They know I love them. But what they do, I've seen this, they'll take a stick with a feather and they'll put it over that blowhole and just wait for the feather to do this. And then they can harpoon their seal. I've never been on a seal hunt, but I've seen that done on like videos and stuff. For those of you who've never worked in Alaska, and those of you who've lived in Alaska and never been around the true native culture out there, think before you speak. Eminent scientist and super genius Al Gore puts out this movie, An Inconvenient Truth. Oh, and he tried so hard to channel the spirit of JFK. He had his picture taken there, looking out the window, his hands clasped at his back, in black and white, mind you. And he beseeches you, begs you to accept his lies. If we don't accept these lies, the entire globe will be inundated within such and such amount of years. Al Gore, the Tennessee 2x4. Here we are. Decades now. 3 decades. Nothing has happened. Everything's exactly like it was. Those of you who believe in those stupid charts, you got to think a little bit more than that. So here I sit. Here sits my Rockstar soda. You know why it's sitting next to me and not floating away? I have a theory as to why that's so and why it's not floating off. It's because the invisible gremlins say they don't exist. I think I can prove they do. I've never seen them. I suspect they're there. To me, it's absolutely proven that they exist, and here's how I know. Gremlins don't leave footprints. Been living in this house for 6 years next month. And this is the same place where the Walden studios reside. And I have never once, winter or summer, seen a gremlin track. Being as they don't leave tracks, that proves to me that they're here. You see the liberal logic? Well, Bruce, that just proves my point here. Does that make sense? As much as Al Gore? So, if it takes all those gremlins to hold everything in place, keeping them from floating away, flying off into the stratosphere, can we really afford to take the chance that they don't exist? This is a level of stupidity coming out of these environmentalists. Okay, for a long time they're telling us that, and they still are, well, all these cows out there farting is causing all this. All these cows belching are causing this. I know some of you said, he said fart. Whatever. Deal with it. Like an adult does. All these cattle are cutting the cheese, ripping their britches, and they're causing this. What do you think it was like, a zillion years ago, when there were dinosaurs, big gigantic brontosauruses ripping in, and they ate everything that cattle eat, I would imagine. And they were probably cutting the cheese on a pretty regular basis with some volume. Yet it took a long time for them to die off. Maybe that's what caused the Ice Age. I'm not buying any of that. Now, at the outset, I told you I'm a conservationist, not an environmentalist. My dad was in Civilian Conservation Corps 4493 in Norris, Tennessee. He was on the project that finished the very first dam on the TVA. That was Norris Dam. That was in 36 and 37 that he was in. Here's Dad That's my dad right there as a 17-year-old kid. Isn't that a handsome dude? My precious dad at about 17 years old. Miss you, Dad. He was always embarrassed because when he received his draft notice in 1943, he was turned down for having a bad heart. All four of his sons inherited his bad heart. Two of us got operations. The last remaining brother died from other things. I got my operation. I had the diabetes that got my brother, but I've kept mine under control. Dad, I do look forward to seeing you, but I'm not in that much of a hurry to leave. Dad, you probably won't hear this, but if you did, you're in a better place anyway. But I am a career soldier. And here's the thing. When I left the Army, it was like pulling my finger out of a bucket of water. That's how big of a hole I left there. That's how much sign I left behind. But in Campbell County, Tennessee, or anywhere thereabouts, every time one flips on a light, to this day, nearly 90 years later, they're saluting you and the boys in Company 4493 to this very day. Norris Dam still stands strong and beautiful. And that park that's around it, strong and beautiful. Here we sit in Alaska. When I was a young man up here, the spruce forests were just beautiful and green. Now, an invasive spruce bark beetle has been going at these trees for decades. And in the greenest part of the year, one looks into the Chugach. You see dead spruce trees. Thousands, tens of thousands of them up there. They're still useful wood. They could be gotten out if we just would. I could show you how. In fact, in my books, I do. But we can't get at them because the environmentalists would just be offended. You might make a scratch some bark on another tree. So the fire danger continues. The fire danger continues. And one day, friends, one day, the Chugach is going to burst into flame and it's all going to burn. When I was a young National Guard private, as stated earlier, I worked in that conservation tower there in Missouri, where my nephew Jay, my oldest nephew, who was one of my de facto kid brothers, someday I'll tell you that whole story, but he still works up there sometimes. And in those days, though, you sat in that fire tower. Now let me explain how this thing works. And in case I never have, you had this big round table, and it was the map of that area with your guard tower smack in the middle. If you saw a fire, you would whip this thing around. You had a compass, you'd point at it, and you had like a sort of like a gun sight. You'd point it at the fire, and you'd call the next tower that you could see, like for instance the Van Buren Tower. Van Buren, we have a fire. It's at this many degrees towards Elsinore. They'd shoot an azimuth to it. Say, okay, we see it. It's at this. When you draw those lines, that's what we call on land navigation an intersection. Where those two lines intersect, that's where the fire is. Boom! All units revved up. We got out there. We put out the fire. I never squirted water on a single fire the time I worked there. Now, those do happen. But by the time we got there so quickly, mainly my job was walking around with a shovel and just knocking the little fires down or just stomping them out with my feet. Now we see forest fires burning out of control. Why? Because we are depending on our devices, our electronic junk. You're going to pay a price for that one day, America. Read my book, The Genesis Gun. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you, I got 5 books in that series. The first one is The Governor's Initiative. Read it. Read it, Governor Dunleavy. You might learn something. The second one is called Bottom Rail on Top. It's beginning to develop right now out there. The third one is called The Kings of the East, developing right now. The fourth one is called Baja Across the Border, developing right now. All 4 of these books were written between 1995 and 2011, thereabouts, 2012. The last one, The Genesis Gun, I just wrote a couple of years ago, and it's the biggest. There's actually 3 books inside that book. But get a look at them. If you want to see what this military intel guy's mind is talking about, you'll say, Bruce, you've been scary close. But I talk about that guard tower in the Genesis Gun, but it's been developed into something better. We kept our fires to a minimum because we put them out quickly. Nowadays, with the death of the fire tower and the push toward modern technology, we're burning our country down. Not good. So in the end, why are they lying to you about global warming? When I was a kid, it was global cooling. They said another ice age was coming. That didn't work out, so they said, it's global warming. Well, that didn't work out either. What's climate change? Guess what, folks? Climate changes all the time. The people who are true scientists will tell you, yeah, this kind of thing happens. Has been happening since time immemorial. There was some Australian scientists said, you know what? What's happening on the sun's surface has more to do with what's happened to our temperature down here than anything we're doing. I don't like pollution. I do not like, boy, it angers me when I see somebody throw something on the ground in town or out in the city, out in the country. But to be so vain as to believe that we can control the environment, like the weather and stuff, you're being naive. And you're being lied to, and then you're showing how naive you are because you're swallowing it hook, line, and sinker without a second's thought as to whether it might be true or not. Remember last week when we talked about that tunnel running from coast to coast, and I proved to you how mathematically how bogus that was? Did that make you stop and say, if they lied to me about this, what else are they lying about? And it's simple math. You may grow tired of hearing it, but I won't stop saying it until people begin to listen. China is striving to be the preeminent power on earth. However, we stand in the way. So how do you kill American industry? Why, you kill factories, of course. Never mind that China is filthy. I don't mean to hurt my Korean friends' feelings. I love Korea. That's my second home. My alma mater is Sogang University in Seoul. Don't be too impressed. I didn't get it because of high marks. I got that. I was in that university because the Army said, Bruce, it's time for you to learn to speak Korean. So you learn or starve, boy. So away I went. But I remember running PT over there. I'd get out and run in the morning, run through Seoul. I'd come back, blow my nose, and look like bricks coming out of my nose because there's so much crud in the air. Look at India. India is so filthy, they have days where they order people to stay inside their house. And you're going to sit there and tell me that my country's dirty? I've been around the world countless times, and the only places I've ever been that are cleaner than us is maybe Australia. Other countries are, well, Canada's awfully clean. But you got the U.S., Australia, New Zealand, and parts of Europe are clean. I was in Ireland, and it was awfully clean there. Well, the rest of them I'm not so sure about. Well, I was in Colombia, and it was very clean. Go down there if you don't believe me. It's pretty amazing. But, Bruce, if only the United States would just give more money to these places, they could... No, those days are over. A lot of these countries have been in business way longer than the United States, and if they haven't figured out how to run their house, I say to heck with them. I know that sounds terrible. We send money to Egypt, and they've been chilling since the flood. They've been over there doing their thing since the flood of Noah, man. And they still expect us to send them money? Nah, no more. And I'm going to say something here, and I don't care if you hate me for saying this. When I see Army-age Ukrainian men showing up here, running from the war that they should be over there fighting, if you don't have your family with you, you're a coward. You are a coward. Shame on you. Now, at the same time, I see Russians showing up, young Army-age men that are showing up here. They're coming over and saying, I don't want any part of that stupid war. This is Putin's war. We don't want any part of it. And I know some of them. Doubtlessly, we will revisit this business in the future. I've got a lot more to say about it than I can put into one blog. But this is just to give you a little taste of where I stand. And it's time for us to say no more. We have got to develop our natural resources responsibly, yes, but we've got to develop them. We have more coal in the state of Alaska. I was listening to Paul Harvey one time, it's probably 20 years ago, and he said that some think tank estimated that there's enough clean burning coal in the state of Alaska to run the nation. And this is stuff that's right there on the ground. Tom Braun, you know what I'm talking about. A friend of mine, he went to dig to put in post holes for a fence he was going to put in, and every time, scrape up the dirt, coal 6 inches down all across his property. And this is clean burning coal. Paul Harvey said there's enough clean burning coal in the state of Alaska that's handily available to run the nation for 500 years. And he said it's estimated there's enough coal that you have to dig to get at in the state of Alaska to run the entire nation for 8,000 years. But we can't develop it because A, you have a governor that has no guts, and B, you've got a bunch of environmentalists running everything. And they laugh at this stuff. They know it's not true, and they laugh at you for believing it. But you believe it, or you knuckle under, like too many Republicans do. You just knuckle right under. And this allows the Chinese to gain more and more power because they don't have any problem exporting their coal and using their coal, using North Korea's coal. That didn't happen when Trump was in office, remember? I do. Folks, pray for this country like you've never prayed before because we need it. We need God. I believe the time's running out, folks. I believe that last night, I'm talking to you today, it's the 12th of May, the day that Title 42 ended. We are under an invasion right now. Make no mistake about it. If our governors had guts, they'd stand up to this. We'll see which ones do. I'm pretty sure I can name at least one that won't. And we'll visit that another time. Pray much, folks. If you like what we got to say here, subscribe. Share it with your friends. Hit like. But subscribe, folks. We want to build this into a streaming channel. Help us in this endeavor. You'll benefit from it. I love you. May God bless you. May He bless our state. Good night.
Alaska, your country is circling the drain. We have a man in the White House who does not have a functioning brain. We have a vice president who's just about as bad. Folks, you've got leaders that aren't doing their job. Mad Moose is talking to you. He's asking you to stand strong. Alaska will go back to the gold and silver standard, and we don't need that American dollar so badly. When they go back to the gold standard, that'll be cool. But listen to the Moose here. You can do better than this, folks. You deserve better. Now act like it.